In Amos chapter 8, verse 11 we read, Behold, the days come, saith the Lord God, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. As prophesied, most Christians refuse to open Bibles today to verify what their pastors say. In this age of convenience, they have been conditioned to trust the pastors without question. This prophesied lukewarm mindset, as Revelation 3:16 calls it, has given rise to false preachers all around the world. These wolves in sheep's clothing can easily lie to their congregations knowing with absolute confidence that the majority of their victims will never check up on them. As for the small number of Christians that do investigate their false message using the Bible, they are quickly kicked out of the churches so as to prevent the truth from spreading. To keep those remaining in the church happy, they now preach prosperity messages on how to gain wealth, amusing sermons, and even rock music mixed with gospel lyrics to keep the people entertained. As prophesied, they can use these false doctrines that all the world agrees with to make their flock feel they are safe and doing the right thing with the thought that since everyone else believes this way, it must be right. Case in point, one of the oldest and most successfully evangelized false doctrines has to be the so-called Sunday Sabbath. In this video, we will look at all the verses they claim are saying the Sabbath has been changed from the seventh day to the first day of the week. Claim number 1. Acts chapter 20, verse 7. And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. This meeting was held at night. If you read on, you will find in the next verse it mentions the many lights in the upper chamber. Later in verse 11 it also states that after they ate, Paul talked a long while, even till the break of day. The question then is, are they saying this is a church service because they broke bread? And since it was on the first day, it must mean the Sabbath was changed. Problem with that thought is, in Acts chapter 2 verse 46, it says that they normally continued daily, breaking bread from house to house. Since they define this as a church service, this must be the format the church must emulate today. If Acts chapter 20 verse 7 is definitive proof we need to validate Sabbath being changed from the seventh day of the week to the first day of the week, then all Sunday-keeping churches must hold church at night, hold church every night, and hold church till the break of day. Claim number 2. 1 Corinthians 16 verse 2. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. There is absolutely no reference whatsoever of a public meeting or a church service mentioned here for when Paul arrives. Some declare this to be a church service because Paul is gathering what they call tithes. But if you read past the verse they give out of context, you will find the word liberality is actually used to describe this offering in verse number 3 of the same chapter. That word defined is monetary gift in Strong's Bible Concordance number 5485. Also notice Paul is asking for that to be given from what God hath prospered in the passage given to sanction Sunday as Sabbath. I ask, is this normal tithing practices of a church to give from that which God hath prospered, which is now stored in savings? Is not Luke 18:12 rather plain, wherein it says, I give tithes of all that I possess? Biblical truth is, it's not a church service because first and foremost it's never declared as such. Nor is it tithing that Paul is gathering, which for some reason they claim makes it a church service. Paul was gathering what we call love offerings today. Finally, if the entire passage is read in context, it's discovered the passage is actually about Paul stopping by on his way to Jerusalem to pick up financial relief for the Christians in financial distress in Jerusalem. Claim number 3. Revelation 1 verse 10. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet. Some use this verse to declare Sunday is now the Sabbath simply because John uses the term the Lord's day. Truth is, the Scriptures already define the seventh-day Sabbath as the Lord's day, thousands of years prior, in Isaiah chapter 58 verse 13, wherein we find the Lord calling the Sabbath my holy day, quite bluntly. Even Jesus himself stated in the New Testament Scriptures in Matthew 12 verse 8, that the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. Many forget the very first thing recorded in the Bible itself is work being done on Sunday in Genesis chapter 1 verses 1 to 5. God in point of fact commands all men to work upon the first day of the week in the heart of the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20 verses 8 to 11. He specifically says in verse 9 of that commandment that 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. Is it wrong for us to obey God? Did not the apostles state in Acts 5:29 that we ought to obey God rather than men? God calls Sunday a work day in Exodus 23 verse 12, Exodus 31 verse 15, Exodus 34 verse 21, Exodus 35 verse 2, Leviticus 23 verse 3, Deuteronomy 5 verse 13, Ezekiel 46 verse 1, and Luke 13:14. In the book The Paganism in Our Christianity by Arthur Weigel in 1928 on page 136 it says, as a solar festival, Sunday was the sacred day of Mithra, and it is interesting to note that since Mithra was addressed as Dominus, or Lord, Sunday must have been the Lord's Day long before Christian times. The term the Lord's Day was first coined by John in the book of Revelation for the New Testament Christian church, yes, but the pagans of old used that term to describe their Lord's Day as well. When Constantine demanded all Christians keep Sunday holy in 321 AD, he also called it the Lord's Day at that time. The warped history being preached by pastors today, wherein they changed what John referred to as Sabbath to what the pagan referred to as Sunday, proves the Vatican was involved in the prophesied end-time agenda, for they have admitted time and time again the following for all the world to see. The Catholic Church took the pagan philosophy and made it the buckler of faith against the heathen. She took the pagan Roman pantheon, temple of all the gods, and made it sacred to all the martyrs, so it stands to this day. She took the pagan Sunday and made it a Christian Sunday. The sun has worshippers at this hour in Persia and other lands. Hence the Church would seem to say, keep that old pagan name Sunday. It shall remain consecrated, sanctified, and thus the pagan Sunday dedicated to Balder became the Christian Sunday, sacred to Jesus. As prophesied by Daniel 7 verse 25, this church has most assuredly tried to change times and laws of the Creator God. Claim number 4. Mark chapter 2, verses 23 to 28. And it came to pass that he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day, and his disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. And the Pharisees said unto him, Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? And he said unto them, Have ye never read what David did, when he had need and was an hungered, he and they that were with him? How he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat but for the priests, and gave also to them which were with him. And he said unto them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. Some have recently started using this passage to say the Sabbath is no longer valid because Jesus broke it or disregarded it when he was walking among us. First of all, nowhere in this passage does it say Jesus abolished or broke the Sabbath. What it does say here is the Pharisees assumed Jesus and the apostles were breaking the commandment by picking corn to eat. Yet Jesus proves with scriptural facts regarding King David, whom the Jews respected, that he and his apostles were not breaking Sabbath at all. Jesus clearly corrected the false teachings of the Pharisees here. If it was okay for David to relieve his hunger and the hunger of those with him by eating bread that had been consecrated and set apart for holy use, then it was perfectly okay for the disciples of Christ to satisfy their hunger by plucking the corn on Sabbath day as well. Both David and the apostles were in God's employment. Basic reality dictates the temple priests and even pastors today perform greater labors on each Sabbath as they do God's work, do they not?